Hi, Dr. Michelle Albers. How are you doing today?
I am well, Chris. How are you?
I am having the best day ever. So, Dr. Michelle Albers is with us today. She is, I met her years ago, I think, 12 plus years ago?
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, she had some hip issues, which she was referred to me from one of her friends and that I was working on. And yeah, I've been training her pretty much consistently, at least 2 days a week ever since.
Yep.
And Dr. Albers has her PhD in nutrition from the Ohio State University, the Ohio State.
Thank you very much. Glad you said it right.
Yes. And apparently the Big Ten's decided not to have football this year.
Yeah.
I'm sure
I don't know. You might be right behind. You never know.
Yeah. Oh, they're all going to fall in line. All right. Sorry, off tangent. But Dr. Albers is she's a nutritional counselor. She's taught at the collegiate level. She consults in clinical and private practice settings, and she presents seminars all over the country. I actually went to one a few years ago. It was amazing. I think it was like 6 hours you talked for, and I was just like, like I'd never wanted to get up to go to the bathroom. It was awesome. Yeah, and she's a registered dietitian in Florida, and I know she was working at Tampa General, working with eating disorders, wellness, intuitive eating, and HAES. What is HAES? I was going to look that up, but I figured I'd have you.
Health at every size.
Health at every size. I like that.
Yes. So it deals with the whole idea of stigma with obesity and whether or not it's obesity that's causing the problem, or is it the lifestyle that's supporting that problem? And can somebody be overweight and even obese and still be healthy? And the answer is yes, by every measurement.
Awesome. So yeah, that's a little overview of Dr. Albers. On a personal note, one of the things that I learned in school, we took nutrition, sports nutrition, and when I got out into the real world, started working with clients with personal training, always had a lot of people asking me how to lose weight, caloric intake, a lot of nutritional questions and diet questions. And oftentimes I would give them my best response, but then I would see you the next day and I would bring up the question that they brought, and you would usually give me a very amazing answer that made so much sense every time, and I could bring that information back to my client, and I always just appreciated how you kind of just cut through the BS and told it like it was, based on all your experience. You've been doing this 30 years now?
30 years. Yeah.
Nice. So you've seen a few things.
I have seen a few things, and some things more than one time, coming and going, coming back around.
So what do you love about what you do? Like when you're going to work with a patient or a client, what drives you every day to, what motivates you to get up in the morning and work with somebody? Like what's your passion about this? How did you get into this? And
well, I think honestly, if you ask how did I get into this, I really think that I understand my clients and your clients fairly well, because I absolutely was in the same place they were. And what I mean by that is I would read things, I would say, that must be the answer. Then I'd read something else and it was the exact opposite. So how could that be the answer? And I literally went to grad school thinking that they were going to unlock the box and give me the answers, then I would know. And unfortunately, what they gave me is the ability to read lots of data and to see that there is no cookbook for a human. There certainly is no cookbook that applies to all humans. And unfortunately, it ends up being so discouraging and frustrating for a consumer to be able to say, just tell me what to do and how to make that happen. So honestly, my passion from the beginning was trying to take some of that data that seems like it's not interesting and or overwhelming, and potentially give somebody maybe some practical advice about it. So that's kind of what those seminars are all about, taking lots and lots of studies and boiling it down into here's what I think you might want to gather from that, or what you might want to do with that. And so when I get up in the morning, honestly, I see patients of all different kinds, but the majority of the patients that I see have eating disorders. And so from one end to the other, eating too much, too little, different, having compensatory behaviors, all of those things. And for me, it's really trying to understand where this person is at the moment, how food and bodies and weight got sort of to be the overarching theme of their day, and potentially helping them with the rest of their team, their physician and their therapist, sort of find out how all of that got tangled together. My real passion on the planet is one that's sort of anti the culture of the day, because the culture of the day says, here's my Instagram picture. If you don't look like this, you're clearly some level of hideous, and you're taking up space. You should go away. When indeed, the DNA that we were all individually given, unique combination of DNA, unless you have an identical twin, there's no version of you on the planet. And so the parts that get frustrating for clients, like, can't I lose weight or can't I have a different body, to me sort of boil down to the level of, can't I be shorter tomorrow? And the answer is, I don't think so. You can wish, you can hope, you can pray, you can do any diet you want, but I don't think you'll be shorter tomorrow. So some of the conversation is not only legitimate, like, okay, I'm not sure that what you're doing is going to take you where you want to go, but I think the uplifting part is, you're already amazing and clearly the perfect version of your DNA. And this is about sort of celebrating that DNA on the planet. It's a little like, if you look at body types, for example, so if I've got a football player and a gymnast, neither one of them could play each other's sports, and not for lack of trying, not for lack of practice, not for lack of knowledge, but it's about what we were handed as far as our DNA goes. And so this is, I think, a bigger picture, and I think it's managing your relationship with food and body and weight, to me, is kind of just this metaphor for finding your authentic self and sort of shining that light out on the planet. And we're waiting for that. So I get excited about it. And it feels like when people make changes about them, you see that the ripple effect shows up in confidence, in risk-taking, in decision-making, and all of the ways that they live bigger and brighter on the planet. And so it's really fun to watch.
Wow, that's really cool. That was a great answer to your passion.
I am passionate about it, I have to say.
That's cool. Yeah, it's I've sent many of my clients to you, and I've always gotten amazing feedback on just how different the conversation was. I think a lot of people go into it like, oh, I got to count calories, or I've got to decrease this or increase that. And a lot of times the science and the chemistry of it, I think, takes over, where it should be more about the psychology and the brain stuff. It sounds like at least over the years that you've talked a lot about the emotional side of it and the psychological side. And, we all are starting to, I think the scientific community and the health and wellness community are definitely moving towards more of the brain aspect of everything, and how we're so in control of everything in here, but we tend to sometimes follow the wrong advice, or you read something in a newspaper or a magazine or an article about some actor using this new diet trend, and I want to look like them, so they look like that, so I'm going to do that diet. And we kind of go down the wrong path a lot of times, for sure.
And never even know if it's even possible for us to look like that person. That's the other part.
I know. And I still, like, every day I'm like, oh, I got to eat a little bit more protein and lift a little more weight so I can get a muscle mass that has never been attainable for me. And even though I know it's very difficult, if not impossible, I mean, if I wanted to spend 4 hours a day working out and eating an extra 3,000 calories a day, possibly, but I don't want to do that. That's just not efficient. It's probably a lot of stress on my digestive system and my body.
Yeah.
So,
plus, I think you're really hinting at one of the other aspects of this. The whole reason that the dieting industry is a whatever $100-some billion industry is because it's really set up on the fact that it's designed to fail. And then when it fails, you have to take the blame, because clearly my product wasn't wrong. And if that didn't work for you, I've got another 10 that you can try. So it really plays on some of those other psychological things, my sense of urgency, my sense of sort of disgust, if you will. I got up this morning and I just hated my whatever, and we're going to fix this. That's all there is to it. And it plays on that. And so even really well exposed people, well-read people can get that little idea of maybe this is the trick. Maybe this is the thing. Now, that's not to say that there aren't ideas that might work for people. And I think that that's an important thing to say as well. Because certainly you can look at someone's intake in the context of their lifestyle. So if you've got somebody working out that's not getting good sleep, that's really, really stressed, that's not eating well, your working out is fine, but not everything that it could be. And so when we take one component, like, I don't want to exercise, just tell me how to eat and I'll look amazing, that doesn't work either. And so even when people get excited about, tell me how to move, tell me how to eat, the other two components people love to ignore, and that is sleep and stress. And without sleep, we store fat. We did not ask for that, but the organism does that. With stress, we store fat. And again, based on what the organism does. And I think that's one of the things that if you can, it takes us out of our thinking rational head for a second into a place that's kind of important. Because this organism that we occupy is really unchanged for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So this organism is worried about a bear, is worried about a famine, is worried about leaving genes in the gene pool. It's a very different mindset maybe than where you are, but it doesn't change that that's the agenda of this. So if we sit around not moving because we're not being chased by a bear, eating donuts because they deliver them to my house and that's easier than doing something else, I don't have to exercise, don't have to do all that, and now I'm locked in my house and I'm really stressed. I mean, the reality of it is the organism reads all of those signals, and it doesn't say, I know you don't want to gain weight during the COVID quarantine. Instead, it goes, this is awesome. I'm going to put all this fat on for you. It's going to be amazing. We're not going to die in the famine.
So your body's producing pleasure hormones, endorphins, and happy.
All of the, well, and the cortisol part of it too. So there's a lot of chemistry that says where you are is dangerous, and danger means I need to be able to leave at any time and take all the people and things that matter to me. And I need fuel stores, because if I go to the next village over and they don't have any food, I'm in trouble. So if I fatten up before I go, I'm going to be able to live. And that's the whole drive, is to keep you alive, keep you alive, keep you alive. And it loves fat, and we're good at storing it, and we're really bad at losing it. But that's because if it were different, we probably wouldn't be here. So our ancestors who made it through all the bear attacks and all the famines and everything else were people that could store fat very nicely. They lived long enough to leave their genes in the gene pool. So the gene pool from which we emerge has a higher percentage of fat storing genes than you would expect, simply because we've selected for those over the generations.
Interesting. So we're good at storing fat. So I'm sure you hear this all the time. So that means I don't need to eat fat, right?
Yeah, I wish we could change those two words, because I know you're absolutely right. I can tell you how many people that say, if I just eat low fat, I'll be low fat, and I can never eat fat because, oh my goodness, I'll be fat. It's unfortunately a lot more complicated than that. And what we know is that we can't live without fat. So depending on your age, there was a time in the late 80s and the early 90s where all fat got thrown away and everybody thought low fat was the way to go. And in fact, not only did we not get healthier by eating low fat, we had actually created an entire new industry, which is the processed food, factory farmed food, not factory farmed, factory foods that do indeed now come out of boxes and packages. They might be low in fat, but they're highly processed, high in a lot of things that we would not find running around on the planet, losing the stuff we need, adding the stuff we don't need. And we ended up getting fatter as a result of taking fat out of our diet, which seems completely illogical, but that's because we've joined those two things together. So without fat, our cells aren't happy, which means our skin doesn't look good, our hair doesn't look good, we don't feel good, nothing works, hormones aren't where they're supposed to be. So you have to have it. Yes, if we eat a lot of fat, the average American diet with highly processed foods can be really high in fat. Obviously, that takes us down a path that we don't want. But I think if we can go back to the environment of our organism, so go back 500 years with me. And what we need to do is mimic that lifestyle. So we need to move the way they moved. We need to eat what they ate. And so if you just go to the basic place of real food, I don't say whole food because that sounds like an advertisement, but food as it falls off the planet. So if you can imagine wherever your ancestors came from, we dug up radishes, or we picked oranges, or we, caught whatever kind of animal that was. That takes a lot of effort. It's not processed. It's exactly the way we are designed to live on the planet. So then flip that and look at the average American who doesn't move at all and eats all kinds of things that literally get delivered to your door, and by remote control, I can open my door, they can bring it in and give it to me on the couch. So we're not working for it. We're not getting the same kind of food, and we are seeing those diseases that are chronic degenerative diseases as a result.
So we've cut out fat, and now as a society, we're getting unhealthier or on average.
Yeah. And even when you talk about putting fat back, there's a caveat, because then we've flipped the switch as though we only have two options. So since no fat was really bad for us, then all fat all the time must be really good. That's not what our ancestors had either. Okay, so there's an argument where you start to say, okay, great, where do I find this? And it's the reason that people are looking for natural sources of fat. People call them healthy sources of fat, but natural sources of fat are sort of key in almost any kind of eating plan that you see around the world, whether it's nuts, avocados, seeds, certain kinds of oils, olives, and even moving into things like cheeses and some milk products that are higher in fat than you might imagine is healthy. But the conversation now seems to be that fat is not only essential, but we need to have it and have a variety of it to make sure that we are able to build everything we need and be as healthy as we were designed to be.
So I know a lot of people have been kind of cutting out dairy from their diet because of, lactose intolerance, idea that humans aren't made to drink the milk of another animal.
Yep.
And then cheeses and things and everything dairy based. So what are your thoughts on eliminating that, or do you eliminate it completely, or do you use it sparingly, or what are your thoughts? What's the current research on that?
I think honestly that you'll find some very interesting research on both sides of the equation. And you're right, people who cannot tolerate milk and milk products are sort of out of the equation, and we have to make sure they get enough nutrition from other things. But whether I choose to have milk and milk products or not becomes a hot little debate. Do milk products support inflammation? Do they support body fatness? Are they giving me heart disease? All kinds of things. And again, when everything got thrown out in the 90s, everything was banned. And now each individual dietary fat is sort of coming back for an audition, like, hi, I'm not like everybody else, you want me. And that's why you'll hear the headlines like, oh my gosh, dairy fat is back. But then somebody misuses or misreads the headline and says dairy fat, that means you can have all the butter you want. Butter's not part of this equation. Dairy is milk and the things made from milk. And so it's like, all right, if we go back 500 years, nobody had low fat options of anything. Okay, so if you were eating cheese or you were drinking milk, it was the full fat version or whatever came out of this particular animal. Now, your argument about should we eat the milk from another animal is a hot little argument. And I would quote one of your favorite guys. Okay, so here's what Joe Rogan says. Joe Rogan says, yeah, we're the only ones that drink milk from another animal. We're also the only ones that drive cars and go to college. So it's an interesting observation, but it really doesn't bear any weight. Because if we're also eating the flesh of those animals, we are again, I mean, what is the real difference? We're splitting hairs by saying, oh my goodness, you're taking this milk. So go back a little bit into history. And the reason that people are looking at high fat things like real cheeses. So if you love cheese, you already know what I'm talking about. When we gave you low fat cheese and fat free cheese, everybody just thought disgusting, for real. But now that the real thing is back, why is the real thing back? Well, again, if you go back 1,000 years, some genius took milk that spoils very, very easily, turned it into cheese. Not only does it not spoil, we like it better the moldier that it gets. That seems wrong. But it also made portable protein. So now you've got a way to get on a ship and go to another place, get on a horse and cross that mountain. You can go farther because we can take protein with us. And so the ingenuity of humans living on the planet using food around them is, I think, the most interesting part of that. And I think with an individual person, if somebody says, I don't like milk, I don't want milk, I don't like the way it makes me feel, then you can create a life without milk. I'm not sure that you're going to find consensus that milk is the worst thing on the planet. And I do consume milk. I have kefir every single day. I like the cultures in it. And so I'm trying to find my probiotics the way my ancestors did. I'm trying to eat kimchi. I'm trying to eat fresh sauerkraut, and I'm trying to eat some kefir to give the bugs for my gut without taking a pill to get them.
Ooh, I love how you just naturally segue into things because probiotics, yay, gut bacteria, gut health.
Yeah.
That's
What a crazy topic, right?
it's amazing now that they're tying it in with brain chemistry and emotional states and all kinds of immune function and
Everything. It
just
has the potential, honestly, to turn everything we know about physiology and nutrition upside down. There's nothing that's been like this in my career, in that it's like, oh, we said this, and it's like, yes, people say we change our mind collectively all the time. But honestly, it was 15 years ago when somebody would say, how's your gut? And you would go, good. I don't have diarrhea. I don't have constipation. I'm going to go with okay. Where in reality, what we know now is there is a universe of microbes that live in our gut that, when they are optimized, give us, honestly, the most amazing chance for our best health. And you're right, connecting it to brain chemistry seems unbelievable. And yet when you talk about managing mood with serotonin management and things like that, we give medications that elevate serotonin levels in the brain. But 70+% of the serotonin in your body is in your gut. And so now you're like, why is it in my gut? And that's exactly what you're supposed to ask. Like, why is it in my gut? And indeed, somebody takes a medication to elevate serotonin levels in their brain. The first thing they tell you is that my gut's all wound up. And it's because what we're producing in the gut from those particular microbes are all kinds, every class of neurochemicals, all kinds of things that are leaving the gut, traveling through the bloodstream, changing signaling pathways, changing nervous pathways to change what goes on in our brain. And that part seems science fiction. That seems nuts. You would say absolutely not true. Only it seems to be not only true in a practical way, like a happy gut is good digestion, good gut function, blah, blah, blah. But now you're talking about better sleep, better mood, better brain function. And that is kind of a world beyond from what we've ever thought would happen.
So how does eating yogurt, taking probiotics, kefir, kefir?
I call it kefir. I don't,
Kefir.
It doesn't matter. Pick one. Yeah.
Kefir Sutherland. How does that effectively change or benefit your gut microbiome?
And that's a really good question. Okay, so I want you to think about this with me. In your stomach, the stomach is filled with a fluid, kind of a stomach juice, if you will, that's got hydrochloric acid in it. The idea is that if we eat things like a virus, like a microbe, it should drop into that hydrochloric acid and be denatured so that we just digest it rather than allow it to live. But the thought about probiotics is we must get live critters from the oral cavity into your gut, and we have to do it in some way. And so sometimes people are taking what's called an enteric-coated supplement of probiotic, which means it's not digested in the upper part of the gut, but it is digested in the lower part. But if I'm eating yogurt, if I'm eating kefir, if I'm eating kimchi, sauerkraut, I am going to kill a lot of those bugs just as soon as they drop in that pool. Right. But the idea is if I eat this on a regular basis, I will have enough of these little guys that sneak through that then set up housekeeping later in the gut. But you also open the door to another conversation. Isn't there a more efficient way to put microbes into my gut? And that would be coming from the south and going north. And indeed, that's the point of view here. And there are indeed some treatment modalities in which people that are really, really sick with guts really out of whack actually get sort of a lavage coming from the rectum that allows them to change the environment from that way. But the idea here is that we're supposed to be exposed to microbes, all right? And we're supposed to be eating them and challenging the organism to kill them and manage them, et cetera. But we want lots of these little guys to sneak through. And once they do, if the gut environment is what it can be and what it should be, it will allow them to optimally bloom.
Okay, cool. So how do antibiotics disrupt that? Well,
I think it's a really
and chronically, like if you.
I think it's a really big question, and I'm not sure we know all the answers. I'll be honest with you. Cool. There was a study that was kind of a shocking one, and it's been out for about 1.5 years now, and it was a study out of Israel trying to find that answer. So they took healthy people, and for 7 days they did a regular broad spectrum antibiotics, like you might take if you've got a toothache or an infection or something. There was a group that had no treatment. There was a group that was given a probiotic, and there was a group that was given a fecal transplant, meaning they had some of their fecal matter stored and then put back in. So they gave everybody the antibiotics, and at the end of the study, they watched to see how the gut would refurbish itself. And what they found was that the group that got their own fecal matter transplanted back was back to normal within 24 hours. So the thought here is, like, when you go into surgery, for example, and they have you bank your blood, you're probably going to be banking your poo too, because that's going to be zapped through all those treatments, and they're going to want that. You want your gut right back as quickly as you can. And then the people that were given a probiotic, interestingly, let me do the other group first. The people that did nothing at all, within a month, had a completely restored gut microbiota with making no changes at all. The group that took probiotics had a lot of the probiotics that were in their supplement, but were missing large amounts of ones that were not in their supplement. And even 6 months later, we're not back to normal. So we've kind of gone around and around with antibiotics. We thought, oh my gosh, we're killing all this stuff, so we must take a probiotic to put it back in. But what this would suggest is get out of the way, and the organism will restore to the pre-antibiotic. Now, of course, that's an acute kind of antibiotic.
Right.
If you're going to be on antibiotics for a long time, that is a new chapter that I don't think anybody's got a lot of good information about.
Interesting.
And that one thing, let me just say, when people say probiotics, you have to know what kind and how much. And if you go into the store like the average consumer does and you just stare at that wall of boxes, you are not alone. Do I want a lot of these? Do I want a whole mess and just not very many? We honestly don't know the answer. We absolutely don't know, with few exceptions, because what we can find is some studies, especially done with little kids, single strains of bacteria that allow them to manage gut function that are kind of amazing. But for the average human, it looks like there is no advantage to taking a probiotic in a sort of preventive fashion. And we don't really know how to give you the recipe to repopulate the gut in the quote unquote optimal way. At least we don't yet.
And then prebiotics compared to probiotics. What's going on with that?
Okay, so prebiotics are the kind of food components that actually feed those probiotics. So probiotics are the good guys, the live little creatures that we're looking for, but we also need to feed them. And this is a perfect example, this segue that you just did. Imagining how does a gut repopulate itself if I've wiped everything out with an antibiotic. The studies show that if I feed you food as it falls off the planet, which is really high in prebiotics, you will create the environment for which the probiotics will bloom, and bloom in an optimal fashion. So here's the real catch. If you're the average American and you want to have a healthy gut and you want to eat crummy food but take a probiotic, you will not fix the problem. It's a little like an aquarium. So if you think of your gut as an aquarium, and I'm going to give you $1 million fish, you still have to keep my fish alive. It doesn't just live because I gave it to you. Okay, so you could change the temperature, the food, the pH, whatever it is, and it could die. Same thing here. I could give you $1 million probiotic, but if you feed it, donuts and pork rinds a little bit later, it's not going to live. But if you feed all the stuff that allows it to live, your fruits and your veggies, your whole grains, seeds, nuts, legumes, all of those things, then my fish is going to flourish. But the kicker is, it would have flourished even if I hadn't given you a fish. We would create that environment, and the fish would then appear and be optimized. So we can't get away with eating crummy. That's really what it boils down to.
Cool. So kind of goes back to an apple a day. It keeps the doctor away, and it's probably starting to look towards more you're giving your gut biome the stuff it needs to be healthy, and therefore all your health indicators improve, or all your.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. And it's funny when you look at this from from an old wives' tale, folk tale sort of a thing about an apple a day, but it's like, we know that apples are amazing in terms of gut function. If you have diarrhea, apples will stop that. If you have constipation, apples will stop that. You're like, okay, cool. I need apples. Clearly, that is the message from the universe.
Yeah, they're just little balls of health. I love, like, every time I eat one, I'm like, I don't know, there's just something, it just probably emotional. I'm like, oh yeah, if I ate an apple. But now we're looking at it like just all that good stuff that's that your gut biome utilizing for being happier. which makes you
Well, and it's
happy.
got both kinds of fiber in it. So it's going to help with cholesterol levels. It's going to help with gut function. It's going to help with fermentation, all that stuff. I mean, it is, I mean, there are a lot of, certainly there are a lot of other fruits and veggies that fit that category as
Right.
well. But an apple just is, easy, portable, delicious, a million kinds of them. I would, as a segue, say that that's where you ought to spend your money to make it an organic version. So if you look at the foods that have the highest amount of pesticides, it is always on the dirty dozen list. Usually strawberries are first, but apples are there. So spend a little bit more money to get an organic apple, and then all the benefits with none of the extra exposure.
So maybe like a brief synopsis of the whole organic versus GMO versus those two debate, or that debate has been pretty hot for a while. I remember one time I asked you about eating organic or not, and you said, well, if it's organic or GMO, it's still an apple. And the stuff that makes it an apple is the nutrition that makes an apple. So what's the difference in the quality of the apple if it's like a
Okay.
GMO versus
And what I was meaning by that is like, it is even in the poorest soil, even, in the worst conditions. Now my apple's not going to be delicious, but if it is an apple, you can tell by looking at it, that means it's got all the apple components. But can I have a better version of that apple? Absolutely. And so the research would suggest that potentially at the very beginning, organic was just really about my exposure to the pesticide, the universe, the earth's exposure to pesticide. But now what we're starting to see is what people said at the very beginning. The data are starting to support that, which is if I grow my foods organically, I also give them the opportunity to have lots more nutrients available from my soil. So I might end up with like this amazing apple. So the reality for me is, or my message is, I think that it's a twofold concern. The pesticides and herbicides that you and I are exposed to on an unknown basis every single day is a little bit dangerous. So anytime that we could minimize our exposure to that by knowing that I'm buying something that does not have an herbicide or a pesticide might make some sense to do. And like I said, if you just Google dirty dozen, you'll see the fruits and veggies for which we can't really wash the pesticides and herbicides away, and our consumption of them is really high. So if you can afford it, and I say that, and at the same time say the huge shift in the availability of organic food by Walmart stepping into the equation, which typically did not carry the kinds of foods that we would say are really the best foods to support human health. And indeed, when they start to bring that to the open marketplace, that tells you that, first of all, people want it. And the more we buy it, the price will start to come down, and you'll start to see that as being, much more regular occurrence and much more available.
Cool. Very interesting. So sounds like you're like pretty up to date on a lot of your research. Where do you get all your data from? I remember you saying with your when you do the seminars, you were utilizing research that was not backed by public corporations or private
Right, right.
corporations.
So when the company that I work for that presents these seminars is an educational company. So they take no money from any company. They do no endorsements. And to be honest with you, I think that's kind of the only way you can do it and feel like people can trust you. So nobody gives any money from any kind of a thing. So this particular company is presenting CEUs for healthcare providers who need to keep their licenses. And so what it really has done is found really good speakers and really good writers that take topics of interest and take the most recent data. And, sometimes it's literally a news blast that came last week, and that gets incorporated into what we're talking about there. So yeah, what I love about it is I get to be as cynical as I'm asking my consumers to be. So, I'm not beholden to any company or beholden to any product.
Cool. So, yeah, with COVID, are you doing those virtually now?
I am. So this company is alive, and they normally would do gatherings of hundreds of people. Clearly, that's not happening. So webinars are happening, and they're trying to weather what the storm is that they have at the moment before we can get back out on the road and start, doing our in-person seminars again.
So what seminars are you teaching right now?
Well, because of my
Or your most
background,
recent?
my seminars sort of stay in that, obviously in that nutrition point of view. So there's always kind of a gut function piece that either has to do with appetite control, has to do with brain and mood, has to do with chronic degenerative disease. So it, depending on what week we're on, there are different topics.
Okay, cool. I think
And if people, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I mean, if people are looking for CEUs, that company is just INR, the three initials INR. You can just go to inrseminars.com. I
Yeah,
will give them a plug, just saying.
yeah, no, I learned more in that seminar than I did in like all my nutrition classes. It was just so real world, and it was just great. So cool. So what are some kind of cutting edge research studies you've been reading on? What are some up and coming promising studies that you've read recently on just healthy eating, healthy living? I remember you said something about you had an acronym for something that you were utilizing. Now it might be not
The
related to the research.
MISS?
Yeah, the MISS. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask
MISS.
you about.
Okay. Well, and I've kind of said it, but it is a thing that, okay, when I talk to people who, and they ask very many questions. Either I'm trying not to have diabetes, or I'd like my diabetes reversed, or I need to lose weight, or I want to gain muscle, whatever that might be, or I'm dealing with an eating disorder. There are two areas that come to mind for me. And one is that we need to eat real food, as we've kind of talked about. But this acronym that you mentioned is one that I just made up so that I can remember the four things. That's just how my brain works. And it's MISS, the word miss, and it's movement, intake, sleep, and stress. So somebody might come to you, Chris, and say, I want to lose weight. I'm going to come every day and exercise, and all my weight's going to fall off. And you're going to go, the research suggests that exercise is amazing, but that weight loss is not always, and not often even, a consequence of that. I have people coming to me saying, just tell me what to eat and I will, and I'll lose all this weight. And it isn't that either. And so when you start to talk about the big picture, sometimes people lose interest because they kind of do want the next shiniest thing. And that is not an insult. That's how we're wired. I would rather do the easy route. That makes perfect sense. But what we're really trying to do is take data as the data are derived and being able to say, this seems interesting. What would happen if you did this instead of that? And in fact, I'll tell you what all of my listservs and my newsletters are saying right now is every single topic now is connected to COVID. So now it's smoking in COVID, it's vaping in COVID. It's not just obesity in COVID. It's there's a caffeine conversation in COVID. I'm trying to remember what I didn't write the rest of them down.
Alcohol, probably.
But then there's gender in COVID, not to mention hypertension in COVID. So all the stuff that now everybody's sort of saying, does that have any effect on this virus or my susceptibility for this particular virus? So, so the cutting edge stuff, honestly, is interesting to talk about. And I think some really important tenets have come out of the research as well as the experimentation that your consumers and my consumers have been doing. If you look at something like intermittent fasting, now when intermittent fasting was published, it was interesting. It's been around for a long time, but it was the 5:2 book that I think was probably the one that put it on the map. And they were on Dr. Somebody's show and said, I ate this way and I lost a whole mess of weight. And the idea being that we should regulate how often we are fed in order to regulate the physiological response to food and food storage. And it's not a novel idea. It's a genius idea to talk about for sure, but it's not novel. The idea is that, again, if we eat the way our ancestors did, we would get up in the morning with the sun, we would go to bed at night with the sun, and we would not be up at 11 o'clock ordering pizza and eating something in the middle of the night. So what the research started to show was that the average American is eating 16, 17, 18 hours a day. And you think, I'm not eating that much. Well, if you start breakfast at 6 in the morning and you're still snacking at 9 o'clock at night, we have crossed over into the 15 and 16 hour range. So the average American then cutting that feeding period down to whatever that author proposes. Sometimes it's an 8-hour window, 10-hour window, 12-hour window. It doesn't, and there are lots of them. Did indeed result in weight loss for a lot of people, and normalization of glucose and normalization of insulin. So there was a lot of good stuff that happened, but a lot of people didn't lose weight on it. And so it was just like the next novel book that I'm going to throw out into the street because it didn't work for me. But there are interesting ideas about that. The organism, your dog is not supposed to eat all day long. That's not how you feed your dog. Our dog, the organism that we live in, is able to find food all day long, but it isn't in our best interest to be consuming food all day long. So even if weight loss doesn't happen, we start to see things like inflammation going down and glucose and insulin going down, which is prediabetes and all of that. So there's a lot of fun stuff that happens with that. Can I tell you that it works for every person? Absolutely not. Unfortunately, it's sort of like the person that says, oh, I just started walking and I lost 14 pounds. And you kind of want to throttle them because you're like, okay, I'm running and doing this. I'm not losing any weight. And it's a single bit of data and it's not the big picture.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately or fortunately, it comes back to this really interesting idea of living in a fairly moderate space on the planet. Can I exercise all day long? I can. To what end? We would have a good argument about that. What's your quality of life like? Have I hurt myself through overuse now? I mean, have I done something actually damaging by taking this to an extreme? Same thing can be said with food. Same thing can be said with not managing stress and not getting good sleep. But it's an important part of that big picture. So I've got people who eat well or are eating according to their plan and they're exercising according to their plan. But they're not getting good sleep because we're not as a society interested in sleep. And now we can stay awake 24 hours and be rewarded for it in all kinds of, fabulous ways in our brain. And we are generally stressed on a normal day. And now we're 6 months into some version of not a quarantine, but some version of a weird life. And the stress part of it is real. So organisms under stress start to prioritize how to stay alive, and eating and hanging out and doing that sort of stuff is what we do. It just isn't our healthiest choice most of the time.
So a lot of the shiny new diets probably work for those that are doing the miss thing, where they're sleeping and low stress. And then, hey, I did intermittent fasting and I was doing all those other things and it was successful. But if you hadn't done all those other things, maybe it wouldn't have been as successful.
Yeah.
So
well, and it's also what you bring to that table as an individual. So I'll bet you have clients who have done old school Atkins, keto, carnivore, whatever that kind of direction is. And you can have some people that say, well, I lost honestly 18 pounds in like a minute or something. And other people that say, I didn't lose an ounce. And when you hear that, in the old days, honestly, we used to say, I feel sorry for you because you're so sadly lying to me or lying to yourself. I mean, there really is a moment where you're like, that can't be true. But we know it's absolutely true. And we know that organisms bring to the table their own needs, their own metabolism, their own optimization. So that go back 50 years, go back 60 or 70 years, and you can see studies where you can lock overweight people on a clinical research ward and you can measure what you're feeding them. You can measure how much they move. You could give them 300 calories a day. Do the math. They should be losing weight like crazy, only they don't. Now they're not cheating. They're not doing anything except their fabulous organism is adapting to a famine. Thank you, organism, except I don't want you to adapt today. That's not how that works. And so what you bring to the occasion is, do you look like your parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles? And if you do, you can see your DNA in motion. And you can see that, again, I can't make you taller. I probably can't change frame size and, necessarily some of the things that people might want to be changing from a physical point of view.
So would you say on average, the ratio of genetics versus lifestyle has a play in how we respond to a diet or a change of nutrition?
I would say that, honestly, I think that lifestyle, this is sort of like health at every size. So lifestyle can support you passing every one of your physical tests, maybe flunking the weight or the BMI part of that. But we also know that some of your most muscled clients will flunk their BMI as well. So we know that that's not necessarily the only way to measure this. But if I eat well, if I do all of my MISS things, and I am healthy as by every measurement that you can take, then there's a moment where you have to make peace with your DNA. So at that point, it's like you're doing everything that you can. You're getting a gold star in every category. And now you don't get to hate your earlobes anymore. That's all there is to it. You just have to make friends with them. Because what'll happen is you'll say, yeah, but you're healthy. And people are like, yeah, but that doesn't matter. I want to look some other way. And if you're doing everything well and your organism is responding by saying, this is you, shiny, amazing, have a parade. This is really, really amazing. And yet we go, yeah, but it's not what I want. It's like, okay, there's no way around that. There's really no way around that. If my football player wants to be a gymnast and is upset that he's a football player, I can't change that. He can not play football, but he will still be of the, genetic makeup that I can't make him shorter, I can't make him smaller, I can't make him any different. And yet he can be a different version of himself and still be healthy. But it's all within the confines of DNA. So I think the health part of it is, I'm going to go the highest percentage, nearly 100% under our control. Because we can see people who absolutely have crummy DNA and work really hard and manage the heart disease that kills everybody else in their family, manages to not have diabetes even though everybody else has it. So sometimes the cards are stacked against you, but there have been really good studies that show that you can absolutely, with all of those other categories, just maximize your health in those directions, and actually sort of stand up to your DNA to the degree that to the degree that you can. I mean, obviously some DNA combo's not so great.
So you can't really change the way you look, but you can change how long you live.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. And I think that that's another part of this question. When you talk about weight loss, that's one thing. So when somebody tells me they're going to go on a keto diet, my first question to them is, are you ever coming off of it? And they sort of look at you like, well, of course I am. I'm going to get thin and amazing, and then I'm going to come off of it. If you've ever known somebody who's done keto and then come off of it, what you realize is keto is really not compatible with the average American intake. So you must choose one planet or the other. You may lose weight on keto, but it will come back with an average intake. Now, if I'm talking about weight loss, if I'm talking about shredding, if I'm talking about doing something specific to a performance, for example, that's one thing. But when you just mentioned longevity, when you see people who around the world eat and live to be 100 or beyond, you find that they don't do anything all that dramatic. They move. They are connected to people. They seem to try to be happy. They eat food as it falls off the planet, and they only eat the food that falls within their gathering areas of their world. And that's where you really sort of end up seeing that our goals can be different. If you're really talking about longevity and minimizing the effects of chronic degenerative disease, we know how to do that. That's with movement, intake, sleep, and stress. And we can take heart disease out of the picture. We can take diabetes out of the picture. We can take some related things out of there. Alzheimer's, many cancers are managed by those very same things. So the kind of picture that we've got now is that Americans as a group are doing everything wrong, and as a result have every bad disease. As soon as you start to fix one disease, the good news is it's a buy one, get 5 free scenario. So if you start lowering your risk for heart disease, your risk for every other disease comes down too. So you don't have to do something different for each one. You just have to take this organism to its best fed, best rested, best stress managed, best moving version of itself. And then that's what you get to deal with that gives you then the lower risk for all of those diseases.
Sounds all within our control too. That's pretty
kind of. And yeah, it's not very sexy. It's not like, hey, you can lose 40 pounds by tomorrow, which is where, again, the shiny stuff, who wants to really, hey, let's go change your lifestyle and we'll see some results in a few weeks and months and years. It's going to be amazing. It is hard to sell that kind of thing. Wellness, meaning my choice today that I cannot see that I've won or lost. I'm not going to see it for months or years. That is a huge leap for a human to make.
Oh yeah, we don't think about prevention. Like we think about survival right now.
We kind of do. And the prevention part of it.
I've never had success like with marketing plans with touting how this is going to prevent things. People are like, I don't care about that.
Well, people think nothing bad is ever going to happen. You know, we
Right.
kind of we're living it at this very moment. I mean, you realize it's like, oh my gosh, is there a virus? Well, I don't have it. So does it still exist? Well, I'm going to have to assume that it does exist because I see it in other places. But it's like talk to a smoker, and they're like, I honestly thought it was not going to hurt me. And you're like, how much more education can we do? And I'm not sure we can do any more education. And they would even say that there's nothing you could have said. You said it all. I didn't listen. I didn't think it would happen for me. So I think what we have to do a little bit better, and this is a whole other debate we can have another day, is how much responsibility does the community have to support healthy habits so that it's not my decision to make 100 good choices today. So that instead my school is walkable. I won't get killed on a bike. I can get good food near my house. I've got stress management as part of what kids get taught in school. I mean, all of that sort of stuff could be part of what we spend our money for in terms of infrastructure to then minimize the kinds of disease that we see in our population at large.
But we still have vending machines and soda machines in all the schools, and
We
that
do,
seems
but
to
see,
be a
that would be
community
a
problem.
debate. Well, it isn't, but that would be the debate that we could roll back. You know,
Yeah.
that they didn't used to be there. They're there for a lot of reasons, and so it's the very delicate balance between capitalism that's unbridled, where it's just like, I can sell my product and if you die, I don't care, or capitalism with a conscience that sort of says, I do have a responsibility here somewhere. It's very much like what we're seeing with COVID, just as it pulls back the curtain to inequities in ability to exercise near your house, food near your house, access to healthcare, all the kinds of things that make it easier to get sick, which makes it easier than to die from any kind of opportunistic infection, is stuff that we now see very clearly how it is uneven in the culture. And we might be able to even that out a little bit, which would not only be some big kind of I don't know, sort of moral and human sort of way of talking about it, but it also ends up being the more fiscally responsible way of doing it too. So it's kind of a win-win if we could pull it all apart and put it back together in a slightly different way.
But I imagine if everybody's healthier, they have to go to the doctor less, they have to go to hospitals less, they have to go, the healthcare system as we know it doesn't make as much money, which is sad, but I mean, sad for them.
Well, but it's one of those things that, I mean, we're sort of evolving. It always, somebody said to me once, you know, the people who made buggy whips had to go out of business at one point when we invented cars.
What's a buggy whip?
I know, you have to look it up. Google that. But the point being that you end up sort of seeing that things do absolutely change. But I agree with you. This has to be a thing potentially that is not based on somebody making money. So whether it's the big medicine or big pharma or big insurance, all the people that have a stake in this game for us being sick are the ones that are going to have to either step aside or allow for, you know, some other nuance there that just says, look, there's another way to do this. I'm not going to say it's easy, and I honestly am not the person that's going to do it, but there's an opportunity waiting.
Yeah, it's just. And that's the one thing with COVID that we've learned is, you know, we're throwing all our money at like vaccines and telling people to wear masks and telling them to stay inside, but not one, at least I haven't heard of many like political leaders saying, hey, let's start a initiative to get people moving a little bit more. Let's boost your immune system. Let's change the way, let's look at what we're going to be feeding our kids when they go back to school, you know, or potentially you're going to have kids transmitting the virus more, but if we can teach them some good habits, some immune, you know, things to boost your immune system, you know, these are all things that could ultimately change everything. And then the next time a big virus comes around, we're going to be, you know, there's going to be more people that can fight it off. But again,
I agree completely with what you're saying. I don't know how to make that happen. That seems to me that it has to come from a neutral place. That needs to come from a CDC kind of place that doesn't, again, have maybe a player in this game.
Yeah.
But everybody else, if you realize some of the changes that have been tried before, where soda sizes were changed in New York City and people said, you can't tell me how much soda to drink. Well, on the one hand, maybe I can. You're letting your kid drink this stuff. I have to take care of your kid now that they're sick, and all my money has to go to take care of your sick kid when we could have fixed that, you know, X number of years ago. So I agree. I think you absolutely speak the truth, and you speak the solution to so much of what's in front of us. We just have to find a way for the average American to buy into that. We do not like being told what to do. And we like saying, you know, I'll do whatever I want, except I'd like my safety net there when I crash and burn, because that's going to happen.
Yeah. It's like we're burning the candle on both ends, literally. And then we're looking for somebody to help us out when we don't have a candle left.
It's totally, and no, it's absolutely true. Well, and you see the same thing here. It's like, okay, if you say, let's have schools done from home and virtually, and you're like, that is amazing. Of course. Well, you and I are sitting here virtually having this podcast. We're not in the same room with each other. But what it turns out is not everybody, shockingly, has the equipment or the Wi-Fi to make this happen.
Right.
So as they handed out computers and tablets at the end of or at the beginning of the quarantine, there were kids that went home and can't use them unless they go to the library, and now the library is closed. And now so you start to see again, it's like, we can fix this stuff. It's not that hard. And we could do the very same thing with food. But remember when Michelle Obama was talking about having a garden and changing food, and how the pushback that she got about, don't tell me what to feed my kids. I talked to 2 of my clients this week who are going back to school and are going back to fast food outlets coming to their school. That's what they have for lunch. And obviously the school doesn't have to have a kitchen. That saves them money. It probably gets a discount from whoever it is, the fast food company that comes. But the food that we're feeding the kids is killing them. The message that we're giving them is, this is good food, eat it. I care about you. This is what you should be eating. None of that's true. And then when they're 20 and they go, man, I don't really know, like, okay, do you know what a fruit is? And they're like, I do not. And changing behaviors at 20 is really hard to do. You know, it's real. I mean, whether you're talking to your exercise people or any of that. And that's where we're missing out.
So we got to change our culture.
I think we absolutely do. I think we absolutely do. And I'm not sure how to make that happen, but I do think that's our one way back to being the kind of super version of America that people are picturing, the pulling together, the let's all sacrifice, let's make these big projects happen, whether it's going to the moon, whether it's making the polio vaccine, whatever we did, we could do it again. We know that it's possible because we've done it.
Well, we just got to keep people like you preaching the good word about changing up the things you can control and taking control of your own health. That's going to help, so we can be less of a burden on the economics of our country, because it's expensive to be sick.
Well, it totally is. And I ask people, you know, can you imagine aging for the rest of your life and not taking medication? And most people go, oh, like, that's impossible. It's like, no, it's completely possible. Yeah. People have done it until we had all these pharmaceuticals, and until, you know, we had all the crummy foods that killed us on top of it. So it's absolutely possible. And it's one of the ways that you can think, okay, if somebody says to you, you need a medication, your response should be, if I go home and move better, eat better, get better sleep, and manage my stress, will this go away? And the answer is yes, in almost every case.
Definitive.
Will we do that? Or take a tiny pill? Let's just see who might win. But again, if we do those 4 things, then it's not just managing this one disease, it's going to manage every other disease that pops up or prevent them.
Cool stuff. So movements, stress. Oh, what was the intake?
Intake.
Sleep and stress.
Yep.
So how does stress affect our bodies from like a chemistry standpoint or a biochemical standpoint?
Okay, so if
just brief synopsis on what's going on.
Sure. If stress is like fight, flight, or freeze, that's kind of what's happening at that point. It is all animal. All right, so stress is cortisol, and the results of cortisol changes vasoconstriction, changes digestion, changes everything, and it just says, danger, 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 let's fix this thing in front of me. Well, that's okay if you're literally trying not to get hit by a car. But the stress that you and I tend to have, or as our culture has, is kind of this constant background, moderate to high level of stress that has the same results, but doesn't quite register as, hey, there's a bear chasing me. Instead, it's just like, when is this going to be done? What will I do? All my decision making. That same bear chasing you happens with us every single day. And so the problem here is that we can say, I'm not stressed, or my stress is fine. but stress will harm us even if we don't acknowledge it. And so it's like saying, I don't believe in gravity. Well, gravity believes in you. It's here whether you believe it or not. So the stress that's here, you and I have to minimize our exposure if we can. And then we have to come up with the antidote of stress management to help us to balance that whole thing out. So the things that make us stressed, we try to manage, but there is stress in all of our lives. So then you've got to do the antidote, which ends up being some of your exercise, some of your movement that's designed to be in a meditative sort of way, a yoga, relaxation kind of thing. Meditation under the huge umbrella, whether that is guided imagery, whether that is a meditative app or a meditation technique that you learn. But what you want to be able to do is to be able to do the opposite of stress in your brain on demand on a regular basis, so that when the bear comes, you are clear-eyed, clear-minded, resilient, and flexible. I can get away from my bear because now I'm not just standing here screaming. Instead, it's like, nope, 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 nimble, got it. But that's only because you've practiced how to connect the brain back to the calm version of our physiology. And that's what all those meditative techniques are teaching us.
So by meditating, we are suppressing cortisol levels and increasing endorphins, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like our happy
Mm-hmm.
hormones are producing and our stress hormones are decreasing.
Yep. And you're also changing the classes of the levels of the classes of neurotransmitters in the brain. So you'll have some of the activity going down. You'll have some of the soothing going on. So serotonin and GABA and some of those other things are manipulated as well. Okay. And when we think that we're not doing anything and we're sort of, it's funny, we can sit and binge a TV show for forever, but somehow sitting still for 5 minutes feels like we should be active somewhere. But it's a very important skill set for an organism to have. We can't stay hair on fire the whole time without a real sort of consequence that is very broad and hits us in every aspect of our physiology.
Cool. So in synopsis, kind of, you don't need to do something extreme like a crazy new fad diet. Maybe just moderation of all your macronutrients and micronutrients, and then get a little more sleep, focus on your stress, and move a little bit more. And that nutrition component is now optimized, I guess you could say, versus doing just I'm going to fast for 48 hours or whatever, and then not sleep, and then maybe work out, maybe not, could potentially change the effects of the diet that you're doing significantly. So
I think that is the synopsis. You just did it. That was perfect.
Oh, thank you. I listened. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's what my approach for my business has been, to kind of start giving people those resources to address all those different areas, with float therapy, with the meditation and the stress relief, and then movement, obviously, as trainers. Yeah. And then intake, where I'm just going to send people to you because you obviously know your shit. So
thanks. I appreciate that. But I think some of the things, and sleep. I think some of the things that you'd recommend are things that sound so sort of old-fashioned and not very dramatic, but we're so far away from them that moving towards them has such an amazing result. So if you said to somebody who doesn't move, just move, they would say, no, that can't be right. It's like, no, I'm not kidding. That's right. And if your movement happens to be play that helps you manage your stress, boom, 2 birds with 1 stone. Get some sleep, force that to happen, change your schedule, set some boundaries, and then just do the moderation with food. Eat real food 80 to 90% of the time. The rest of the time, you get to have the stuff that makes you happy and the stuff that makes life worth living.
Awesome. So when you have somebody that has that comes in and has some serious issues, you obviously, nutrition is your specialty, but are you pretty much early on integrating those other factors into their treatment plan, or at least making sure they're addressing those sleep and
yes
stress?
I mean, I think you have to, and obviously as each person comes in, they're there with a slightly different sense of urgency, and when they're seeing me, it often is diet related. but you can't really be successful if you don't look at that whole picture. So we have to at least talk about that picture and see how many of those other 3 factors are going well, or how many of them could stand to have a little improvement, and what would that do overall if we can make that happen.
Awesome. So that's neat that we got you on as a nutritionist, but it just comes back to the whole gamut of everything working together. And that's kind of how I teach movement. You know, you can't fix your shoulder if your knee doesn't work right. And, you know, and then if you're not sleeping, everybody who's loses sleep or has bad sleep patterns knows how ineffective their day is afterwards, and how their stress increases also, and how we manage stress. So pretty neat stuff. I'm really super excited to share that with everyone. And we'll get you well known for your philosophy. I think that's really cool. And I think that's one of those things that when more people know about it, it's just little things that can become big things and help to maybe shift the way our whole society looks at being healthy and losing weight and living longer, more importantly, and happier and healthier, not just living
Well,
longer.
and we could the choices that we get to make today are the only ones that matter. So it doesn't have to be something dramatic. It just has to be some sort of the next choice that takes you in the direction you want to go.
Awesome. Well, that was great. I appreciate the time you're taking with us today. And Dr. Michelle Albers, thank you for coming on today. And if anybody's watching this and you guys want to set up a session with her, I highly recommend it, because just talking with her for an hour has opened up my eyes to a lot of things. And we all have our own specific needs and conditions and things, and that's what she specializes in. So thank you again, Dr. Albers. And we'll be talking to you later. I'll probably see you tomorrow.
Thanks,
Oh, you
Chris.
work out
It was
tomorrow.
great.
I get to work out
Yeah,
tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, kiddo. It was nice talking to you.
All right. Have your best day ever.
Thank you. You too.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.